everybody, welcome to Relished. I'm Alli. I'm a nutritionist, and a yoga teacher, and I'm here to talk to you every week about nutrition topics. Super excited about this week, as always. We're going to be talking about wheat. We're going to talk about the history of wheat, what is wheat, and all the different types of wheat and other grains in the wheat family. Then we're going to do some health information, and then we'll talk about gluten. Then we're going to do a recipe for homemade oyster crackers, which it's a DIY oyster cracker recipe, which I am really excited about because my son loves oyster crackers. I love oyster crackers. I think my husband loves oyster crackers too. So they're just great to have on hand. And I've never made oyster crackers, so here we go. All right, so today's topic, if you didn't see this to begin with, we're going to talk about all-purpose flour, but we're also going to be talking about a lot of other components of the wheat family. So if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. I love having a discussion during the show. I have added two things to the chat already. One, I added the recipe that we're doing today. You can find it on relish.com. It's called DIY Oyster Crackers. And also I put my Instagram handle because we're going to cook the crackers during the show. We won't be able to see them, most likely, during the show. So I will post the outcome afterwards. So I do want to tell you a little bit about the recipe. We're going to take a little break from information in about 10 minutes, or about maybe 10 minutes into the show. And I have already made the dough for the crackers, as you can see under that glass behind my right shoulder, is the dough. It has to sit for 15 minutes. I'll tell you what's in the dough when we go to the recipe. But I want to roll it out, make the little crackers, put them in the oven so maybe we can see it during the show. Okay, so wheat. What is wheat? Wheat is a cereal grain, and it comes from the genus name is Triticum, which sometimes I feel like sometimes you see that word. So that means that it's from the wheat family. And it's one of the oldest and most eaten whole grains in the world. And it's the most widely produced and consumed cereal grain in the world as well. Lots of different cultures consume wheat in one form or another. And we'll talk about where it comes from. So wheat's history can be traced back to a wild grass called Triticea. It's kind of spelled differently than it sounds. Triticea. And that includes all the glutinous grains, which we'll talk about gluten in a little bit, but the glutinous grains such as wheat, rye, barley, and some of their other relatives. So it's pretty much known, or the archaeologists have found, that it originated in the Fertile Crescent, which was in Western Asia, sort of Middle East and Northern Africa, like around Ethiopia, and that area is kind of where they have found that it first grew, where wheat first grew. And then it traveled around a little bit after that. I'll tell you where. So the earliest archaeological findings have found that it was originated around, like when it started to become cultivated, was in southeastern Turkey, dating back to 12,000 years ago. So that was quite a while ago. Then the cultivated wheat came to Greece, Cyprus, and India, 6,500 BCE. Egypt, shortly after 6,000 BCE. Germany and Spain, 5,000 BCE. And then by 3,000 BCE, it had reached England and Scandinavia. So lots of these wheat plants are traveling around. And now it's very common everywhere. So lots of different forms and types of wheat. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. But the most, they say the most ancient of them all, the beginning of it all is called einkorn, Einkorn. And that was considered to be the first wheat gathered and cultivated. And so that's interesting. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. That's something that we can still buy today. It looks like wheat, the wheat berries that we eat, but a little bit different. So that's pretty cool. I looked at pictures of all the different kinds, and they all look the same, but kind of different. So there we go. Okay, so let's talk about some of the kinds, and then we'll take a little recipe break. So basically there are two types of wheat. There's hard wheat and there's soft wheat. So the hard wheat has more protein and it has more gluten, and that's typically what's used to make things that need to be sturdy, like breads and pastas and things like that. So we'll go into that when we talk about all the different types. But basically, the more gluten in the flour, the more strength it has, the sturdier it is. So that would be a hard wheat. And then there is soft wheat, which is basically has less protein, has some more starch, and is used for things that need to be softer, like pastries and cakes and things like that. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So about 75% of the wheat grown in the U.S. is hard wheat, and 25% is soft wheat. So that's pretty interesting. So now let's kind of dive into all the different types of wheat grains and just grains that are in the wheat family. So first off, let's talk Durham wheat. So Durham wheat is a hard wheat. It's high in protein and gluten, and it's used typically to make pasta and couscous. Most Durham wheat today that's grown is called amber Durham, which has a pretty golden color, apparently. And it typically grows without irrigation, so it's grown in dry climates. Then there's hard white wheat, and it's hard. The kernels are hard, and it's light colored and kind of a chalky colored, I guess. And it has medium level of protein, and it's planted in dry areas as well, and it's used for bread and for brewing. Then there is soft white wheat, which there's a lot of W's when I'm talking. It's soft and it's light colored, and it's low in protein and grown in temperate, moist areas. And that's used for pie crusts and pastries. Then there are the red wheat berries. So if you're going to go to the grocery and you want to just cook and eat like the whole grain of wheat, you're going to look for wheat berries. And they call them red wheat berries because they do have like kind of like a reddish brown color to them. And they're the individual wheat kernels. And they're usually referred to as wheat berries because they kind of look like little berries. And you can cook them whole like you would rice. You usually have to cook them a little bit longer because they're like really sturdy. So a whole wheat grain has 3 components, and we talked about this in my ancient grains episode. So if you haven't seen that episode, check that one out because that talks a lot more, kind of breaks down what a grain is. But I'll just say it here, that a whole grain typically has 3 parts. It has the germ, it has the bran, and it has the endosperm. So the whole wheat berry has all of those. We'll go into more later. So those are red wheat berries. And then they're the most commonly grown wheat in the U.S. And then there's an albino version called white wheat berries. And they are lighter in color. And they have a milder flavor as well. But same nutritional value as the red wheat berries. So those are kind of the wheat grains. And then, so still in the same family, still glutinous grains, very similar to wheat, but now we're going to go into some other things. Spelt, which I don't know if you've heard of that. It's become more popular in the last several decades, I would say. It's kind of an alternative if you think you have a wheat sensitivity, but maybe you want to try Another grain in the same family, still gonna have gluten. So if you have a gluten issue, then you would still want to avoid the spelt, but it's just slightly different. It's probably the best known of the ancient grains, and it's also called dinkel wheat or hulled wheat, but it's very similar to the wheat that we're used to, but a little bit different. So there was this famous person. I thought this was so interesting. This quote, I'm going to read it to you. There was a famous person 8 centuries ago named Hildegard von Bingen, and he wrote about spelt. And he said, "The spelt is the best of grains. It is rich and nourishing and milder than other grains. It produces a strong body and healthy blood to those who eat it and makes the spirit light and cheerful." So, I don't know. Maybe it does. I don't eat spelt a whole lot, but I'd like to try that and see if it does make the spirit light and cheerful. I thought that was pretty fun. So that's spelt. All right. Another wheat is Coruscant Wheat, also known as kamut, K-A-M-U-T. Kamut is a trademarked name of this grain, which is the Coruscant wheat. And it's considered a type of Durham wheat, so same family, a little bit different. So the thing about kamut is that apparently it's always organic, and it's higher in zinc and magnesium and selenium, which is an antioxidant. We love antioxidants, when compared to the other modern wheat that we typically eat. And it's especially popular in Italy, and apparently they produce about half of the world's production of kamut. So, and I've seen that. You can buy the whole grain kamut. You can buy it as a puffed kamut, kind of like puffed rice, but it's puffed kamut. Or it's a lot of times you can find it in like cereals, like kamut flakes, things like that. Then there is another grain called farro. Some people say farro, and it's also known as emmer. And this is one of the oldest forms of wheat out there. And one of the old historians of the Roman Empire, Pliny the Elder, wrote about emmer as back in his time, he wrote about it being an ancient grain. So we know that back then was a while ago from now, and so it was even more ancient back then. So I think that's really interesting. And farro, I always say farro, some people say farro. Farro is delicious. So you kind of cook it kind of like rice as well. You boil it, and then you can use it as a salad or a side dish. I used to have a really good farro salad at an Italian restaurant that I used to go to all the time. So try it, check it out. Lots of fiber, lots of good nutrients in it. So you can also buy wheat flakes, which look just like rolled oats, but that wheat has been rolled. So it looks like a rolled oat, but it's wheat. Same for spelt. You can buy spelt flakes. And then, okay, we got 3 more, then we're going to jump into this oyster cracker recipe. Okay, then there's Bulgur Wheat, which if you have ever had tabbouleh, a lot of times bulgur is used as the grain. To make bulgur, bulgur, you take wheat kernels that are cooked, then you dry them and you break them into smaller pieces. So they're already partially cooked, so once you buy it, you only have to cook it for a little bit longer, so like 15 or 20 more minutes. And it's also, so it's really delicious as a salad, like tabbouleh, which has lots of herbs and grain. Delicious. Okay, another one is Frica, which I think is just fun to say. It's F-R-E-E-K-A-H, and that's also another form of wheat. So basically they take young wheat and roast it, and then this is a traditional food of the Middle East and northeastern Africa. Also, you can have this as a salad, side dish, just by itself, but you kind of cook it the same way. You boil it, season it the way you'd like. But organic Frica typically supplies 7 grams of protein per serving, which is great. And it's also a good source of magnesium. And it has a little bit of a smoky flavor, probably because it's been roasted, and a little bit of a chewy texture too. It's really good, really, really good. Check it out. Okay, and then the last but not least and then we're going to do a break, then we'll talk about some flours, is einkorn, E-I-N-K-O-R-N, which they say is the most ancient of the wheat grain. And it's still grown these days in Austria and France and Germany and some Eastern European countries. And I looked at it, and it does look like wheat, but it's just smaller, almost looks like rice. So it seems like it's a little bit simpler of a grain, or less complex, I guess. But it's apparently, studies show that compared to modern wheat, it's higher in protein and phosphorus and potassium and beta carotene and other nutrients as well. So I've never had einkorn, but I'd like to try it. So if anybody has ever had it or does try it, tell us about it next week. Okay, so we are going to jump right into this DIY oyster cracker recipe. Then we're going to come back, talk about some flours, because we're using all-purpose flour today. And I want to tell you about that. Especially because, here, I'm going to tilt this down a little bit. Okay, so DIY oyster cracker recipes. I just wanted to make this recipe because, you know, it is made with all-purpose flour. It's something that most of us have in the refrigerator, or in the pantry all the time. I always have it because we make a lot of pizza here, and I like to use the all-purpose flour. But I just thought, what a fun thing to make, because oyster crackers are always a crowd pleaser, and why not try to make them? So, we're making them today. So, the oven is preheated at 375. I already made the dough. The dough has all-purpose flour, a little bit of sugar, baking powder, salt, butter, 2 tablespoons of butter, not a ton, but some, and cold water. You make the dough, you let it rest on your work surface, and you put a bowl over it. This is just the bowl I use. I kind of rinsed it out, put it back on. It's on a floured surface now. And now we're going to roll. Here, I just want to show you. Ooh, it's nice and soft. Okay. Isn't that nice? Looks like a really big biscuit. Okay. So, this is on a floured surface. And I'm going to roll it out. It says to roll it out into 1/8 inch. So, that's pretty skinny. That is a pretty skinny disc. But we're making oyster crackers, so they're going to be pretty small. Okay, and you can cut it into any shape. The picture on the recipe, they are little squares. It says you can do squares or diamonds, or what does it say? Squares, rectangles, or diamonds. I'll probably do mostly squares, but some different shapes too, because this is not going to be a perfect square of dough. Okay. All right. So hopefully you can see this dough rolled out. I'm going to move this a little more space. Okay. Alrighty. This is very exciting. I'm really excited to be making homemade oyster crackers. Okay. So the dough, I think it's about, I don't think we need this anymore either. Okay, 1/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to take a large knife. The largest of my knives. And I'm going to start cutting little pieces. Whoopsies. Okay. Some of them are going to be, so the edges are going to be different shapes just because. So I'm going to make tiny little shapes like that. And then we're going to put them on the baking sheet, which has been lined with parchment paper. Okay, this is going to take longer than I thought, my goodness. Okay, I'm going to cut these strips, and, all right, now these will be squares, little rectangles, but they're cute, so about 1/2 inch squares. All right, so I wanted to do all-purpose flour because it's just such a common flour, although doesn't have the most nutrients of all the wheat products out there, but that's okay. Because I think it'd be interesting to try this recipe with whole wheat flour, which does have a lot more nutrients in it. So maybe we can try that another time. Okay, so lots of little squares here. They're so cute. You see? Okay. Oyster crackers are just such a fun little snack. Great to take to the park or just to put on soup or eat by themselves. Put on a salad. I'm from Cincinnati, and if you've ever heard of Cincinnati chili, it's spaghetti and chili and cheese, and then a lot of times you put oyster crackers on it. So I've always just kind of loved oyster crackers. Okay, so we're going to do this. And, okay, I'm going to continue that in a little bit because I want to keep going back to our information. Okay, but here I'm going to show you what this looks like. And then I will show you the outcome after the show. I wish I had one of those, like, fast forward things where it shows me doing it really, really quickly. Okay, so that's fun. We'll see the outcome on Instagram this week. Okay, so let's talk about flours. So I used all-purpose flour. And as you can see, it's unbleached. And Trader Joe's, because I always go there. Okay, so all-purpose flour. So we talked about how grains are typically made of three: germ, bran, endosperm. So with all-purpose flour, it's just the endosperm. So they removed the germ and the bran, which is where a lot of the nutrients are. But it makes a different kind of flour. So typically it's made from a combination of hard and soft wheats. So, and the protein level is somewhere in the middle. It's 10 to 12%, so like a fourth of a cup, which is a serving, has 3 grams of protein, mid-range. So, all-purpose flour, you can buy it bleached or you can buy it unbleached. And the bleached has a softer texture. The unbleached has a little bit more structure and kind of maintains a little bit more of the wheat. So I typically like to use the unbleached. And, you know, you can use all-purpose flour, many purposes, all-purpose. So for baking breads and biscuits and pizza dough and cookies and all kinds of things. So something good to have on hand. And always remember, all-purpose flour is different than self-rising flour, which self-rising flour is all-purpose flour that has had baking powder and salt added to it so that it helps it rise. Different category. And then there's bread flour, which is made of entirely hard wheat. So it has a little bit more protein, 12 to 14%, and it strengthens. So because of this protein, because of more gluten, it holds better for yeast breads. It has a little bit more structure. Especially when it's combined with yeast. Like, yeah. And so it has a chewier consistency as well. Then there's Durham flour, which we did talk a little bit about Durham wheat. So Durham flour is also made of hard wheat, and that is typically used for things like couscous and pastas. It has a higher protein content than bread flour. And this is interesting. I learned that it's used to make noodles, and because of its rough texture, it holds sauces better on pastas. So that's good to know. So typically Durham flour is more of a fine texture, but if you want a coarser version of Durham flour, that is called semolina. Interesting. Then there's 00 flour, which is also used to make noodles. And it's a very fine, powdery texture, so it makes a very silky pasta noodle. Then, that one's kind of hard to find. I'm sure you can order it online, or there's an Italian grocery store here in town that I know you can buy 00 flour from as well. Then there is cake flour, which is all soft wheat and has a very fine texture. And the protein content is a lot lower, so it's 5 to 8%, which is lower than the all-purpose, and it makes a softer, more tender product like something like cake. Then there is pastry flour, which is also soft wheat, but it has a little bit more protein. So it has 8 to 9% protein, a little bit more than the cake flour. And that is perfect for things like pies and tarts. So it's going to be tender, but holds itself together. And then there's whole wheat flour, which that is made from the entire wheat. So the germ, bran, endosperm. So you're going to get a little bit more oils. You're going to get a little bit more fiber. You're going to get a little bit more nutrient, or a lot more nutrient. So it produces a heavier, denser product. So if you're making whole wheat pizza dough or whole wheat cookies or whatever, they're going to be denser than the than regular all-purpose flour. Hi, Mercedes. Thank you. Thank you for joining the show. I'm always happy to see you here. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So a lot of times people combine whole wheat flour with white flour or all-purpose flour just so it's not super dense but still has all the nutrients. So that's just something to remember. And it's typically made with the red wheat. But there's also flour called white whole wheat, which is like, remember how we talked earlier about how the red wheat berries are red, and then there's the albino version called white wheat flours. So white whole wheat is made from the white wheat berries, which is very interesting. So there we are. Those are all the flours. And now I'd like to talk about gluten. So gluten, you know, we all are kind of familiar with it these days because everybody is talking about gluten. A lot of people aren't eating it. So what is gluten? Gluten is the name of some of the proteins found in wheat and other grains similar to wheat that have gluten, such as, so all the wheats like wheat berries, durum, semolina, farro, kamut, all those, plus rye and barley. Those all have gluten. So gluten helps keep the food maintain its shape, and it acts like a glue. So when flour and water are combined, the texture is very gluey, and that is because of the gluten. And the two main proteins in gluten are called glutenin and gliadin. And gliadin is responsible for when people are having issues with gluten, it's the gliadin that they're having issues, their bodies are having issues with. So apparently, one place that I read when I was looking up gluten information said that gluten gets its name because of the glue texture. So, not sure if that's true, but I thought that was pretty interesting. So, people that avoid gluten typically are ones that don't feel well when they eat wheat products or gluten, especially people with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity or a wheat allergy or other conditions. So that's typically why people are avoiding it, because they feel discomfort. Those of us that don't feel discomfort, lots of good things about wheat and gluten. So, speaking of which, let's talk about the health benefits. And then, gosh, time has gone so quickly on this show today. Okay, so when I'm talking about the health benefits, I'm typically talking about whole wheat, because that's where all the nutrients are. So the whole wheat products like whole wheat berries, spelt, farro, kamut, and Frica, and einkorn. Those are the whole wheats. So they're high in fiber, which is great, great, great for our digestive system. Also, high fiber diets have been associated with lower risk of heart disease, lower risk of type 2 diabetes. It can help with cholesterol levels, and it can help reduce inflammation that's associated with some conditions. And let's see. So oh yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. I had something else to say about the fiber, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Whole wheats, the whole wheat products are also high in folic acid, which is good for pregnant women, because it helps prevent neural tube birth defects in newborns, and it's also been found to possibly help with Alzheimer's disease by protecting the neurons in our brains. Also, whole wheat, high in antioxidants. We know that's good for us. Good for our digestive system and our stomachs and our intestines. So whole grains, they're insoluble fibers, help things move through in our bodies, and helps especially with cholesterol, like pulling the bad cholesterol out of our bodies. And they have also found that whole wheat may be a prebiotic, which, if you haven't seen my prebiotic-probiotic show, check it out. Which is prebiotics. Prebiotics help make a nice environment for the probiotics to grow the good bacteria in our bodies. And it may help prevent colon cancer probably because of the fiber content of the whole wheat. So that's the story on wheat. So much to talk about wheat. So please check out my Instagram this week. I will be posting a picture of these oyster crackers I'm super excited about. They already look good. The dough feels nice. So I'll keep going on cutting those oyster crackers and the dough for them, and I'll post. Thank you all for joining the show today.